The strength of stepping away. Have you ever noticed how some people command presence without uttering a single word? They don't chase. They don't explain. They simply withdraw. And suddenly, the room shifts. People start leaning in, wondering what changed, scrambling to feel close again. It's not manipulation. It's the quiet art of stepping away. And most people never realize how powerful it really is. This isn't about playing games or being cold. It's about understanding a deep psychological truth. Humans crave what they can't easily access. When you're always around, quick to respond, eager to help, constantly giving, your energy begins to fade into the background. It stops being a gift and becomes an expectation. But the moment you step back, everything changes. Suddenly your absence is louder than your presence ever was. Those who overlooked you begin to feel the void. Those who took you for granted begin to question what went wrong. And all that energy you once handed over so freely now feels sacred. This is where the power begins to return to you. Like the moment right before you hit send. The breath you take instead of launching into defense. That stillness, that's leverage. You've been told that strength is loud, fierce, commanding, explosive. But the truth, silence is subversive. It breaks cycles. It forces awareness. Try it. Stop feeding the noise. Stop reacting. Stop explaining. Even in something as trivial as a group chat, you're always the first to reply, the one who keeps conversations going. But one day, you don't. You leave the message on read. You don't justify your quiet, you just vanish. Watch what happens. Are you okay? They ask. The silence becomes its own message. They feel the pullback in their bones. And just like that, the balance begins to shift. You didn't scream. You didn't argue. You didn't plead. You just stopped participating. And the absence said everything. Because here's the thing. Every relationship you've ever had has an invisible contract, a silent agreement about access. Not just physical access, but emotional, energetic. You've been the one to hold space, to soften blows, to calm storms, to fix. But that role you've been playing, is it really you? Or is it the version of you that's been rewarded for being predictable? They're not connecting with your truth. They're connecting with your patterns. They know when you'll cave, when you'll laugh to avoid confrontation, when you'll say, "It's fine," even when it's breaking you inside. That's not love, that's programming. And the more reliable your emotional response is, the easier you are to manipulate, even unintentionally. Because once someone learns which emotional buttons to press, they don't have to respect you, they just have to push. But what happens when you stop responding? When the bait doesn't work? They stumble. Their script collapses. They're left with uncertainty. And in that pause, you reclaim something they never truly saw. Your power. It was never your affection they counted on. It was your reaction. That was the emotional currency. And when you no longer give it, their illusion of control vanishes. See, they don't fear your anger. They fear your neutrality. They don't dread your voice. They dread the silence where their dominance used to live. The moment you stop showing up on cue, they're left wondering, who is this version of you? And that's the right question, because finally, you're meeting yourself. Let's be brutally honest. Most people don't respect your time. They respect your availability, your accessibility, your usefulness. But your time, your finite, sacred, soul-infused time, that's rarely honored. Because you were trained to give, to overextend, to auto-renew like a subscription service to everyone else's emotional chaos. And every time you do, you go broke. Not financially, energetically. You sacrifice the night you needed to decompress. The bath, the book, the sacred silence. For yet another phone call, another meltdown that's not even yours. You hold space, you nod, you shrink. And they feel lighter. But you? You're vibrating lower. You've just bartered your peace for their proximity. Again, your body, your being. It's all frequency. Every word, every choice, every boundary or lack thereof emits a signal. Joy, clarity, self-worth. Those are high frequencies. Guilt, obligation, depletion. Those drag your vibration down. And the more you say yes from a place of pressure, the more you retune your entire field to chaos. You start attracting people who expect your overextension, not because they're malicious, but because you've broadcasted that this is who you are. You've conditioned them to expect your exhaustion. And here's where the trap gets spiritual. You start mistaking being drained for being devoted, being used for being loved, self-abandonment for some kind of moral high ground. It's not. Every yes your soul didn't consent to becomes a crack in your alignment, and cracks become fractures. Emotional, mental, spiritual. That's when burnout hits. That hollow ache of living a life that doesn't even feel like yours anymore. And still, most won't ask what it cost you to always show up, because they never thought you were running on empty. You were always there, right? But here's the reminder. You don't owe access to everyone. You don't need permission to protect your energy. You don't need to dim your light to make others comfortable in their dysfunction. You weren't born to be emotionally on call. You were born to align with your soul's rhythm. And the truth that haunts? You don't get more time. Your life isn't endless. Every hour soaked in resentment is one you never recover. So don't just ask who you might lose by pulling back. Ask, who are you losing by staying available to everyone but yourself? What if, instead of asking, will they still love me if I say no? You asked, will I still love me if I keep saying yes? Your soul didn't come here to shrink. It came here to radiate, to expand, to vibrate at the full frequency of truth. Even if that rattles the world around you, let them adjust or let them leave. Because this is your life, and it's time to start living it on your own terms. Here's the quiet tragedy. Being too available is often just self-erasure in disguise. When people admire what you do more than who you are, it creates a counterfeit closeness. They love your service, your softness, your ability to hold space. But are they holding you? Or just the role you perform? Maybe you've played that role so well, so completely, that no one ever stopped to ask who you are beyond it. Maybe you didn't either. Because here's the haunting part. At first it feels like love. It sounds like gratitude. It moves like trust. But it's not love. It's utility. And the longer you serve, the more invisible you become. You didn't speak your pain because your silence became your value. You became essential because deep down, you didn't believe you were lovable without being needed. Jung called this collapse of identity. When the self disappears into the persona, the mask you made to survive became the only version people recognized. It wasn't manipulation, it was protection. You became the competent one, the loyal one, the always there one. And the mask? It stayed. Until one day the performance became your prison. You weren't engaging, you were rehearsing, you weren't connecting, you were maintaining your relevance, your role, your spot in their lives. But somewhere along the way, you forgot who you were when you weren't needed. And when usefulness becomes identity, stillness feels like rebellion. Because if you're not proving your worth through output, who are you? That's the question you've been running from. But it's the one that can set you free. Because at the end of all this giving, all this fixing, all this doing, you're surrounded by people, but profoundly alone. Not because they failed you, but because you taught them to love the version of you that served them. You were generous, but also afraid. Afraid that if you stopped being extraordinary in what you give, you'd be forgettable in who you are. But usefulness isn't love. It's just the most socially acceptable version of self-abandonment. And as Jung would say, the more you fuse with the mask, the louder your shadow grows. The anger, the exhaustion, the depletion, they don't vanish, they wait. And one day, they rise. Not to ruin you, but to ask, what would remain if you stopped being everything for everyone? You stopped functioning. Not because you're broken, but because you've been pretending too long. You've acted like you're limitless, but you're not. And pretending to be is not heroic. It's a slow erosion of your soul. You deserve to be held, not for what you do, but for what you are. You deserve to be embraced in your stillness, in your silence, in the places where you withdraw and say, no. Those who only show up when you're fixing something, those who only love you for what you provide, are not your people. The ones who stay when you're resting, when you're quiet, when you're no longer performing, they're the ones who truly see you. They are the ones who restore love to safety, who remind you that love isn't something you earn by effort. It's something you're worthy of simply because you exist. So this is your invitation. Lay the mask down. Step away from the act. Stop performing. Withdraw the version of you designed to manage other people's discomfort and see who remains. Not out of spite, but out of protection, for the sacred pieces of you that were never meant to be transactional. You are not a resource. You are not a utility to be accessed on demand. You do not exist to keep proving your value. You are here to live in your wholeness, your rough edges, your beautiful flaws, and your messy, honest truth. And those who can meet you there, who don't need you to fix, serve, or entertain, those are your people. Because here's the secret. Real connection doesn't begin in performance. It begins when the curtain falls. It begins when you stop doing and start being. Your power doesn't always vanish in fiery explosions or dramatic meltdowns. More often, it slips away quietly, leaking out in unnoticed moments. Through reactive habits, unnecessary fights, and energy drains disguised as urgency. At first, you don't recognize it. It feels justified. You rage in comment sections over arguments you forgot you cared about. You send paragraphs to someone who is never capable of hearing you. You replay imaginary conversations in your head, sharpening your response for a confrontation that may never even happen. And by midday, you're heavy, mentally fogged, emotionally wrung out. And you wonder, why am I so exhausted? Why does everything feel so loud? The answer is surprisingly simple. Every time you overreact, every time you act on impulse instead of intention, you're experiencing a subtle blackout, a power outage in your emotional field. Carl Jung understood this long before social media turned thought into theater. He didn't see the psyche as a container for thoughts, but as an energetic current, a living system that responds to focus, attention, and unresolved emotion. Each time you react without reflection, you scatter your energy. You lose alignment. You fuel your shadow instead of your essence. Reactivity feels like movement, but it's often just chaos with no direction. A form of spiritual dizziness. And here's the truth many avoid. You can win the argument and still feel lost. You can be completely right, and yet drained, disoriented, hollow afterward. Why? Because your energy wasn't invested. It was spent, and it left nothing in return. You don't gain power by reacting. You gain power by deciding what deserves your energy and what doesn't. That's where emotional discipline comes in. Emotional discipline is not numbness. It's not about being indifferent. It's about preserving your power. It's the art of protecting your nervous system from being hijacked by every conflict, every provocation, every invitation to drama. It means walking away from arguments meant to drain you, choosing silence when provoked, not because you're afraid, but because you know the other person isn't listening, and you've outgrown the need to be understood by those determined to misunderstand you. It means understanding that not every conversation is sacred. Some are traps dressed up as dialogue. Some are black holes that consume your clarity. Avoiding reaction is not the same as avoiding truth. It's the refinement of your truth. The ability to feel everything deeply and still choose what to express and when. To keep some parts sacred, held in your own awareness, never needing an audience. That's sovereignty, but that's not how society operates. We live in a culture that feeds off reaction, an attention economy designed to keep you perpetually triggered. The more you react, the more your energy is extracted. By algorithms, by ideologies, by emotionally hungry people seeking hosts for their wounds. So you must interrupt the loop. You must reclaim your attention, audit your emotional spending, withhold your power from the arenas that only wish to consume it. You're not here to be constantly set off. You're here to evolve, to transform. And that means guarding your energy like your future depends on it, because it does. There are defining moments. Those split seconds after a trigger lands. A word, a tone, a glance. Your body braces, your heart races, your jaw tightens, and your mind floods with old narratives. They're disrespecting me. They're trying to diminish me. I have to defend myself. But that rush, that urgent need to act, is not weakness. It's memory. It's an echo from the past. An imprint of an old wound surfacing, screaming, "Do something before you disappear." So we react, loudly, defensively, sharply. Not because we're broken, but because some younger version of ourselves still believes that silence equals erasure. But if you can pause, if you can sit still in the heat of the trigger, something incredible happens. You see it for what it is, not a threat, but a teacher, a signal, a flare revealing the unhealed within. The trigger isn't proof of your instability. It's a map to what still holds sway over you. Not the person who upset you, not the current situation, but the wound that hasn't been made whole. Most people flee this realization. It's easier to lash out than look inward, but the true battlefield is within, and the true enemy is the unconscious pattern that keeps pulling you out of your center. Carl Jung often spoke of the shadow, the disowned self hidden beneath your personality, the mask you wear, the part of you that never got a seat at the table. Triggers are the voice of the shadow, not to shame you, but to remind you of what you've neglected, what you've left behind. But healing doesn't mean staying in the argument. It means staying in yourself. It means witnessing the internal storm without being swept away. Not shutting down, not fleeing, but holding yourself through the waves, to feel the heat without exploding, to recognize your edge without crumbling over it. This is mastery, because mastery doesn't mean you never react. It means you know your reaction well enough to discern what belongs to this moment and what's just an echo. It's knowing the difference between your conscious self and your conditioned self, between your truth and your trauma response. When someone insults you and you feel yourself gearing up for battle, but instead you take a breath, you pause, you observe. You've exited the trance. You've stepped into presence. You're no longer being moved by the wound. You're moving through it with clarity. This is the difference between being reactive and being sovereign. One is based in survival. The other is rooted in self-awareness. And yes, it's hard. It asks you to sit in the places you've avoided, the ache of abandonment, the sting of betrayal, the hollow of invalidation. But if you stay long enough, if you breathe through it, you take back what the wound tried to steal, your ability to choose, to speak with purpose, to be silent with strength, to remain centered when the world tries to pull you apart. Because here's the truth. Being triggered is inevitable. But letting that trigger define you, that's a choice. This is the real inner work. Not pretending you're healed, not avoiding every confrontation, but practicing presence when your nervous system screams to disappear. You don't have to fight every ghost from your past. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone determined to ignore it. You don't need to match anyone's chaos with your own. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. No defense, no explanation, just presence. A stillness that says, I know who I am. And this doesn't get to decide that. Because real power isn't loud. It's not reactive. It's steady, calm, grounded in the knowing of your worth. This is the moment you understand. The trigger no longer controls you. You do. And that is not suppression. That is evolution. If you want to measure how free you've become, don't look at how you act when things are easy. Look at who you become when you're challenged. Because true sovereignty isn't born in peace. It's forged in the heat of provocation, in the breath you take instead of the scream, in the silence you choose instead of the argument, in the dignity you maintain when everything in you wants to collapse. That is how you meet yourself. That is how you reclaim your power. And you'll notice, many people never actually see you. They see a version of you shaped by their expectations, their projections, their unresolved needs. They don't see your essence. they see their reflection in your presence. And if you've spent your life being adaptable, agreeable, emotionally tuned in, you've likely become the perfect mirror. Not because you wanted to, but because it kept you safe. You learned to read the room, to sense tension before it formed, to meet needs before they were spoken. You became what others needed, long before you even knew what you needed. That's not love, that's performance. When people are relating to a projection of you, they're not seeing your soul. They're interacting with an image, a role, a utility. You become the strong one, the helpful one, the unshakable one, the one who needs nothing. And as long as you keep playing that part, everything seems to work. But the moment you stop performing, the moment you need something, or say no, or step back, the entire dynamic shifts. Suddenly, you're inconvenient. Suddenly, you're difficult. Because the illusion has shattered. And in systems where your compliance was mistaken for your character, your truth will always feel like rebellion. They don't see it as betrayal because it's wrong. They see it as betrayal because it disrupts the balance of control. Because it cracks open the illusion that the relationship was mutual, when in truth, it was always conditional. Conditional on you remaining within their carefully constructed boundaries. Carl Jung taught us that projection is an unconscious act. People displace the parts of themselves they can't handle, their wounds, their fantasies, their guilt, and assign them to others. It's automatic. And if you're not conscious of it, you might confuse being idolized with being loved. But they are not the same. Love is grounded in recognition. Projection is driven by unmet needs. Love nurtures freedom. Projection demands submission. The real harm of projection isn't just being misunderstood. It's the subtle erosion of your sense of self. When you're not seen as a person, but reduced to a role, a symbol, a placeholder in someone else's emotional equation. That's where it shifts from misunderstanding to manipulation. You're applauded when you comply. You're affirmed when you sacrifice. You're admired when you remain quiet. But the moment you reclaim your energy, your time, your autonomy, everything changes. The warmth turns cold. The praise turns into passive aggression, critique, or worse, silence. Affection is retracted like a leash, meant to tug you back into character. They call you selfish, distant, ungrateful, not because you've harmed them, but because you've broken out of the mold. You've stepped out of the costume they needed you to wear. And in that moment, most people collapse. They retreat. They shrink to fit again. Because losing that connection, even a false one, can seem more frightening than losing yourself. But then comes the turning point. Usually after being emotionally depleted time and time again. When continuing the act becomes heavier than walking away from the stage altogether. That's when the facade begins to fall. When you peel away the layers of expectation and become someone unfamiliar. At least to those who only ever knew the version of you that fit their needs. And yes, some people will walk away. But something else dissolves too. The web of control that relied on your cooperation. Because manipulation only functions with predictability. It thrives on your silent compliance. It depends on you continuing to play along, even when it devours your peace. But once you stop cooperating, you become unpredictable, not erratic, sovereign, no longer legible through their assumptions, no longer molded by guilt, no longer softened under pressure. This version of you, the one who says no without flinching, the one who values boundaries over approval, this version will disorient those who never truly saw you to begin with. But that confusion? It's sacred. It means you've stepped off the stage. You've ceased being a projection. You're becoming a full-spectrum being, messy, complex, whole. Someone who no longer distorts themselves to remain palatable. This isn't rebellion. It's reclamation. You were never meant to be interpreted. You were meant to be witnessed. And those who can't, those who won't, were never in communion with you. They were only in relationship with their idea of you. So let the character dissolve. Let the applause fall silent. Let the version of you that lived for others' comfort vanish. And in that emptiness, let something softer, something authentic and unshakable, arise. Let the version of you come forth who no longer participates in your own disappearance. The one who no longer fears being misread. The one who chooses reality over reverence. The one who is finally free. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not an escape. It's a reclamation. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But he also recognized that not every conflict is worth engaging, especially when it's engineered to provoke reaction, not growth. When someone pokes at you with criticism, distortion, or a theatrical display, they're often not addressing you. They're speaking to the image they've imposed on you. And if you respond without awareness, you validate that role. You step back into the costume. That's the trap. Silence breaks that pattern. It ends the loop, not with retaliation, but with absence. An empty space where reaction used to live. And that emptiness? It collapses the illusion. Because without your participation, their story loses its plot. Their strategy has no target. Their projection has no anchor. This is why your stillness unnerves them. Silence robs them of control. To remain silent when your buttons are pushed is not avoidance. It's mastery. Psychological precision. It is what Jung called individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole, of separating yourself from what others expect of you, of resisting the impulse to perform just because someone's drama demands it. And yes, they'll misunderstand. They'll call you cold, detached, distant. Let them. That too is part of the old narrative. Let their discomfort say more about them than about you. Because you are not here to be molded by misinterpretation. There is a profound power that lives not in shouting, but in standing still. Not in defending, but in discerning. Lucid silence isn't the absence of strength, it's the presence of clarity. It's not the silence of retreat, but the silence of awakening, of a mind that no longer scrambles to correct or perform, of a soul that understands not every moment demands speech. Some moments demand stillness. In that pause between stimulus and response, insight begins to bloom, but only if you hold the pause long enough to harvest it. Because when you react too quickly, you miss the details. The glance they almost gave you, the words they almost spoke, the quiet contradiction between what they say and what they do. And more importantly, you miss the internal cues, the ways you habitually betray yourself, the old grooves of reaction, shaped by childhood, shaped by trauma, shaped by the roles you thought kept you safe. But silence. Silence reveals the whole map. It shows you the script beneath the sentence, the manipulation cloaked in compassion, the patterns wearing masks of apology. This is the birthplace of freedom. To observe instead of react is to step out of the play and take your seat in the audience. Not above others, but beside yourself, with your own awareness. From that stillness you realize, you don't need to out-argue the lie. You only need to stop sustaining it. You don't have to rewrite the narrative. You just stop supplying the energy that holds it together. Lucid silence speaks more truth than 1,000 carefully crafted replies, because reactive speech is often laced with fear. But when you wait, when you see before you speak, your voice becomes a blade, clean, precise, unwavering. This is emotional maturity, the kind of strength that isn't loud but lasting, the kind of clarity that becomes indistinguishable from power, not the kind of power that controls others, but the power to never again be pulled away from yourself. And still, speaking your truth isn't always liberating. Sometimes it's exhausting, especially when your words fall on ears not prepared to hear them. We're taught that transparency is always noble, that if we just express ourselves clearly, others will respond with compassion. But not everyone has the capacity or willingness to receive the truth. And sharing your soul with the wrong people only leaves you feeling more unseen, more isolated. Every time you speak your boundaries, your needs, your inner reality, you're offering a part of yourself. That offering has a price: emotional energy, mental clarity, vulnerability. So ask yourself, are you placing your truth where it can be honored? Or are you bleeding your soul into a void? Jung warned of this, giving your truth to people who only see their own reflection when they look at you. They're not listening, they're interpreting, through filters of assumption, through lenses of control. And if someone has already decided who you are, nothing you say will reach them. Not really. Trying to explain yourself to people who twist your words is not communication, it's damage control. You don't owe anyone a play-by-play of your healing. You don't have to debate your boundaries. You don't have to defend your peace to those who thrive in your chaos. You have the right to be selective with your voice, to protect your energy, to speak only when it's safe and not out of obligation. This is wisdom, to recognize when someone asks for your truth to connect, and when they're extracting it to control. And when you notice how often you over-explain just to feel heard, how quickly you dilute your truth to maintain harmony, how depleted you feel after speaking to those who don't really see you, that's when the shift begins. Speak less where you're not valued. Speak fully where you are. Let your silence sort the rooms. Let your stillness say what doesn't need words. Because when you stop offering your voice to those who never earned it, you don't harden, you evolve. And finally, you speak like someone who knows their words are sacred. Because understanding your boundaries isn't the same as holding them. Recognizing your patterns isn't the same as breaking them. Awareness is not the destination, it's the doorway. Jung reminded us. Transformation begins when awareness meets responsibility, when realization turns into action. It's not enough to know that people-pleasing is rooted in fear. You have to walk through that fear and say no anyway. It's not enough to say your peace matters. You have to protect it in practice. Let the phone ring. Let the misunderstanding exist. Let your silence be your shield. Discipline becomes the bridge between who you were and who you're meant to become. And yes, it will feel strange at first, even wrong, because your body is still used to the old dance. But every moment you choose truth over habit, clarity over chaos, presence over performance, you're not just shifting behavior, you're reclaiming your life. Not perfectly, but persistently. This isn't about having all the answers. It's about taking the next honest step. About living, not just analyzing. About embodying, not just explaining. So ask yourself, are you living your truth, or are you rehearsing your past? Because reflection without action is just another disguise, and clarity without change is just another prison. Start here. Start small. Hold the line. Let the silence breathe. Let the phone ring. That's when healing stops being an idea and becomes a revolution. Choosing solitude can feel daunting, especially when your value has been tightly woven into your relationships, into the roles you play, the space you occupy in others' lives. We're taught that being alone means something's wrong, that if you're not included, not constantly connected, then something has failed. But what if that narrative is a lie? What if solitude isn't a sign of brokenness, but the very beginning of healing? There comes a moment when the roles you've been playing start to feel exhausting. You hear yourself saying yes when your heart is pleading no. You keep showing up to things that drain you. You smile, you agree, you participate, even when it steals your peace. And maybe you've been doing that for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to simply be, without an audience, without expectations. Solitude or sacred space? This is where sacred solitude steps in, not isolation out of bitterness or avoidance, but a conscious return to yourself. It's not about pushing people away. It's about turning the volume down on everything else so you can finally hear your own voice again. At first, the silence might feel uncomfortable. It might echo with loneliness. But if you stay long enough to get past the noise of discomfort, something extraordinary happens. You begin to meet the version of yourself that's been waiting beneath it all. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society. It helps us blend in, function, be accepted. But over time, if you keep the mask on too long, you forget who you are without it. To return to your essence, you need time away. Not forever, but long enough to see clearly which parts of you were born from people-pleasing, fear, or repetition. This is sacred solitude, It's the sacred pause where you stop performing. You stop being who others expect, and you start rediscovering who you've always been, when no one needs anything from you at all. You learn to enjoy your own company. You choose stillness over obligation. You say no without apology. You sit in silence and realize you're not lonely. You're finally at peace. And from that peace, something profound begins. You start to rebuild a life that reflects your truth, not someone else's expectations. You no longer seek endless reassurance. You stop chasing connections that always leave you feeling empty. You begin choosing what feels real, even if it's quiet, even if it's small. Because sacred solitude doesn't disconnect you, it reunites you. Sometimes stepping back isn't rejection. It's remembrance, it's reclaiming, it's coming home. And when you do return home to yourself, you no longer search for your worth in someone else's eyes. You carry it with you, everywhere you go. Letting go can feel like grief. But often, it's not loss. It's liberation. It's not the end of something beautiful, but an escape from something that was quietly draining you piece by piece. When we start pulling away from someone, our instinct is often guilt. We wonder if we're being heartless, selfish, overly sensitive. But stop and ask yourself with honesty, are you mourning the connection? Or are you finally detoxing from the chaos? Not all bonds are nourishing. Some are suffocating, confusing, even addictive. You find yourself responsible for their moods. You tiptoe around their triggers. You leave conversations feeling more scattered than grounded. That turbulence can feel like depth, but it isn't. Emotional chaos is not intimacy. It's instability masquerading as closeness. And walking away from it isn't cold, it's clarity. You may not realize the weight until it lifts. But one day, after some distance, you'll feel it. Peace. Not fireworks, just calm. Just space to breathe. Release and rebirth. You'll stop overanalyzing everything. You'll stop replaying conversations in your head. You'll stop trying to fix what was never yours to heal. And in that space, a quiet realization lands. What you feared losing was the very thing that was holding you back. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Emotional chaos, if unchecked, becomes a pattern we normalize. But the moment you step back and grant yourself stillness, you begin to see it for what it really was, a loop, not love. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped clinging to what hurts. It's not a wall, it's a boundary, a sanctuary for your energy, your mind, your spirit. And yes, at first, it can feel like something sacred is ending. But what's actually ending is the version of you who believed pain was the price of connection. What rises from that ending is strength. When you stop depending on people who disturb your peace, you start relying on your own intuition again. Your inner world becomes steadier, your thoughts clearer, your heart lighter. Sometimes what we label as loss is simply clarity, finally having room to breathe where confusion used to live. Let that clarity come. Let it stay. There's a quiet power that returns when you stop investing in what drains you. It doesn't shout. It just exists. You'll feel it in the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you choose yourself without hesitation. This is your rebirth. Not the self you created for survival, not the version you shaped for acceptance, but the one that has always been there, whole, aware, untouched by noise. You don't rediscover this self by adding more. You find them by releasing, pulling back your energy from illusions, stepping out of old roles, letting expired identities fall away. Rebirth begins when you stop settling, not just in love or career, but in how you speak to yourself, how you tolerate being treated, how you excuse what breaks you just because you're used to it. You begin to notice how many of your decisions were based on fear of being too much, not enough, misunderstood, or left behind. And when you stop feeding that fear, something else begins to grow. A self that no longer performs or chases. A self that simply is. Jung called this individuation, the unfolding of your truest identity, not the one shaped by societal scripts, but the one that emerges when all the noise disappears. This renewed self doesn't seek validation. It doesn't shrink in the face of discomfort. It doesn't fear being alone because it recognizes solitude as sacred preparation. Boundaries become birthplaces. And though there is grief for the masks, the roles, the years spent making yourself smaller, it gives way to something holy. A version of you that's rooted in truth, not approval. Who creates instead of copes. Who attracts instead of pleads. Who becomes without needing to explain. And those who resonate with that frequency, they'll find you, because you're no longer hiding your signal. The truth is, rebirth doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like silence, like shedding, like whispering, "I don't want this anymore," and trusting that something better will grow in its place. And it will. Because when you stop pouring your energy into what depletes you, you don't just get your power back, you redirect it. Into healing, into clarity, into a life that finally fits. This is the self you were always meant to meet. Not a newer version, just the real one. And now that you've stopped settling, you're finally ready to live as them. If these words stirred something deep inside you, if you're tired of shrinking, tired of justifying, tired of settling, then let this be your turning point. Type "New Me" in the comments. If you're done choosing from fear and ready to choose from wholeness, subscribe to the channel to keep moving forward with us. And if you're ready to go deeper, watch the full playlist. Share your story in the comments. Tell us about the moment you chose yourself and how everything changed. Let others learn from your journey, and always, protect your energy, speak your truth, and most of all, move like you're already free. Until next time.